If you open any modern history book covering the summer of 1940, you will find page after page dedicated to a single elegant machine, the Supermarine Spitfire. It was the glamorous poster child of the Royal Air Force, an aerodynamic masterpiece with elliptical wings that captured the public's imagination and dominated every propaganda reel. It looked like a luxury racer because, frankly, that is exactly what it was born from. But propaganda reels do not win wars of attrition. Grit, mud, and assembly lines do. While the beautiful Spitfire was getting its photo taken, the real heavy lifting of Western civilization was being done over in the mud. Sitting on the grass, surrounded by mechanics wielding basic wrenches and rolls of fabric, was the Hawker Hurricane. It was boxy, thick-winged, and partially covered in painted cloth. To the uninitiated, it looked like a dinosaur sitting next to the all-metal Spitfire. But this ugly duckling held a secret that the glitzy Spitfire could never match. It was practically impossible to keep out of the sky. The Spitfire was an elegant rapier, but the Hurricane was a dense iron blacksmith's hammer. When you fired the guns of the Hurricane, the entire airframe stood perfectly still. It was the most stable gun platform we had. Here is the cold statistical reality that history tends to sweep under the rug. During the desperate, sky-tearing months of the Battle of Britain, the glorious Spitfire did not score the majority of the kills. It wasn't even close. It was the rugged, easily repaired Hawker Hurricane that accounted for a staggering 60% of all German aircraft destroyed in that pivotal conflict. It was a machine defined by an incredible historical paradox, a plane built out of wood and fabric, dismissed by purists as obsolete before the war even started, that ultimately saved Western Europe through the sheer power of brutal, unglamorous logistics. To understand how this fabric-covered underdog dominated the skies in 1940, we have to look back to the late autumn of 1933. The British Air Ministry issued Specification F/7/30, a demanding call for a new high-performance fighter capable of daylight interception. While other design teams scrambled to create radical, hyper-complex metal monoplanes from scratch, the legendary chief designer at Hawker Aircraft, Sydney Camm, took a completely different, highly pragmatic approach. Camm was a no-nonsense visionary who understood the brutal reality of wartime manufacturing long before the first shot was fired. Instead of forcing Britain's factories to learn entirely new, complex metalworking techniques, Camm chose to evolve what his workers already knew. He took the proven, traditional structural framework of the successful Hawker Fury biplane and completely re-engineered it into a low-wing monoplane. It was a brilliant compromise between future aerodynamic demands and existing industrial capability. The heart of this new design was a remarkably tough fuselage skeleton made of high-tensile steel tubes mechanically fastened together rather than welded. Over this iron cage went a series of wooden formers and stringers, which were then wrapped in high-grade linen fabric. When the prototype first took to the air on November 6, 1935, powered by an early 990 horsepower Rolls-Royce Merlin C engine, it shattered expectations. It hit a top speed of 315 miles per hour at 16,200 feet. It was fast, it was rugged, and most importantly, it was ready for industrial mass processing, right out of the gate. Sydney Camm's genius didn't just lie in designing an aeroplane that could fight. It lay in designing an aeroplane that an ordinary automobile factory could build by the thousands, using simple tools. Camm introduced a critical, thick-profile wing design that allowed for a massive structural advantage.
While the Spitfire's thin, elegant wings were a nightmare to manufacture and required complex internal spars, the Hurricane's thick wing gave engineers plenty of room. Camm used that extra internal space to install a revolutionary defensive payload: 8.303-inch Browning machine guns tucked neatly outside the propeller arc. By the time the first production Hurricane Mark I rolled off the line in late 1937, Britain possessed a weapon that was mechanically simple, extraordinarily stable, and primed for the industrial meat grinder ahead.
But when the phony war suddenly erupted into the blistering violence of the Blitzkrieg in May 1940, the Hawker Hurricane received a devastating reality check. Dispatched to France to support the British Expeditionary Force, the Hurricane squadrons were thrown directly into the path of Germany's cutting-edge aerial blitz. In the skies over France, the Hurricane's early design limitations were brutally exposed by a faster, more aggressive adversary, the Messerschmitt 109E. The Hurricane Mark I was immediately outpaced and outclimbed. The fuel-injected Daimler-Benz DB601 engine of the Bf 109 allowed German pilots to dive sharply into an attack without their engines sputtering, whereas the Hurricane's Merlin engine, relying on a traditional gravity-fed carburetor, would briefly cut out under negative G-forces. Even worse, those early production Hurricanes were flying into combat with wooden, fixed-pitch, two-bladed propellers and lacked any form of armored plating or self-sealing fuel tanks. They were sluggish at high altitudes, and when enemy rounds punctured the forward fuselage, the results were catastrophic. The cockpit became a furnace in seconds. If a round hit the unarmored gravity fuel tank sitting right in front of your instrument panel, burning aviation fuel would spray directly into your face and lap before you could even reach for the canopy latch. The losses were nothing short of a massacre. In a mere matter of weeks during the Battle of France, the Royal Air Force lost nearly 500 Hurricanes, wiping out the core of Britain's experienced fighter pilot registry before the home defense had even begun. To the High Command back in London, it looked like a total operational disaster. The Hurricane was being heavily outpaced, outgunned by the 109's 20mm cannons, and widely written off by critics as an obsolete relic that would break under the pressure of a full-scale invasion. With the survival of Britain hanging by a thread, the Air Ministry didn't scrap the Hurricane. They re-engineered its operational DNA on the fly. Lord Beaverbrook, the newly appointed Minister of Aircraft Production, initiated a ruthless, round-the-clock industrial effort to modernize the battered fighter. The aircraft that had left France as a vulnerable underdog was about to undergo an aggressive technical transformation right on the front lines. First, engineers ripped off the obsolete wooden two-bladed propellers and replaced them with revolutionary Rotol three-bladed, constant-speed metal units. This single modification instantly transformed the aircraft's performance, drastically reducing takeoff runs and boosting its rate of climb by nearly 300 feet per minute. To fix the deadly cockpit fire issue, crews installed a quarter-inch thick steel armor plate behind the pilot's seat and wrapped the forward fuel tanks in Linatex, a self-sealing layers of natural rubber that could instantly plug a 20mm cannon puncture. The constant-speed propeller turned a sluggish, bleeding platform into a highly aggressive fighter overnight. It gave our boys the throttle control they needed to actually stick with a 109 in a dogfight. But the most critical modification wasn't aerodynamic, it was logistical. While a damaged Spitfire wing required specialized metalsmiths, hydraulic presses, and weeks of factory downtime, the Hurricane could be patched together in a field tent.
Because its rear fuselage was still made of wood and fabric, ground crews could simply cut away torn linen, weld a new section of steel tubing, and stitch on a fresh patch of fabric using standard needles and dope glue. The Hurricane was rapidly mutating into the ultimate weapon of attrition, a fighter that could be shot down at noon, rebuilt by dinner, and sent back into the sky by dawn.
To truly understand how the Hurricane won the war of attrition, you have to look at the harsh, unglamorous mechanics of how it operated in the field. Unlike the Spitfire, which required pristine concrete or smooth runways because of its narrow, fragile landing gear track, the Hurricane was built like an industrial tractor. Its wide, rugged landing gear retracted inward toward the fuselage, creating a massive, stable stance that could handle muddy, shell-cratered forward grass strips with absolute ease. Once in the air, the physical and psychological experience of flying a Hurricane was defined by its incredible structural rigidity. Thanks to Sydney Camm's thick profile wing, the 8 0.303-inch Browning machine guns were clustered tightly together near the aircraft's centerline. When a pilot squeezed the gun trigger on the spade grip, the heavy steel tube frame absorbed the massive recoil effortlessly. While the Spitfire's thin wings would flex and cause its guns to spray bullets in a wider, less concentrated pattern, the Hurricane remained rock solid. It was a sniper's platform, wrapped in iron. In a Spitfire, you felt like you were wearing a delicate glass slipper. In the Hurricane, you sat up high, looking over a wide nose, surrounded by heavy steel tubing. It gave you the comforting feeling that you were riding inside a tank. This stability dictated a brilliant tactical division of labor during the height of the Battle of Britain. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park ordered the fast, agile Spitfires to climb high and tie up the escorting Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. Meanwhile, the rugged Hurricanes were sent in low to do the heavy, bloody work of tearing apart the heavily armored German bomber formations. Flying straight into a wall of defensive fire from dozens of Dorniers and Heinkels required ice-cold nerves, but the pilots knew their fabric and steel workhorse could take hundreds of hits and still bring them home. On August 17, 1940, the brilliant Tactical Division of Labour faced its ultimate trial. Over the sunlit coast of Kent, Flight Lieutenant Archie McKellar of No. 605 Squadron spotted a massive wave of over 40 Heinkel H-111 bombers escorted by Bf 109s. Leading his Hurricane flight straight into the center of the German formation, McKellar used the aircraft's incredible gun stability to perform a legendary feat. In a single, continuous attack lasting less than 10 minutes, he systematically shot down 4 German bombers and a fighter, completely scattering the enemy raid before they could reach their industrial targets. Just one day earlier, on August 16, the Hurricane's legendary durability earned the Royal Air Force its only Victoria Cross of the entire war. Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson of No. 249 Squadron was patrolling over Southampton when his Hurricane was jumped from behind by a Messerschmitt Bf 110. Cannon shells tore through his canopy, piercing his foot and fracturing his gravity fuel tank. The cockpit instantly erupted into a roaring inferno of burning aviation fuel. My skin on my hands was peeling off from the heat, and my flight suit was catching fire. But as I prepared to bail out, a Messerschmitt Bf 110 slipped right into my gun sight. I decided that if I was going down, I was taking him with me. With his hands and legs actively melting in the cockpit furnace, Nicholson stayed at the controls. He aggressively maneuvered his burning Hurricane, tracked the German fighter, and held down the trigger until the enemy plane exploded. Only then did he scramble out of the blazing cockpit and pull his parachute ripcord.
Nicholson survived, and his battered Hurricane, though destroyed, had proven that Camm's steel tube cage could protect a pilot just long enough to turn absolute disaster into a legendary victory. As the frantic air battles over England wound down in late 1940, the Hurricane's career was far from over. In fact, it was just entering its most versatile phase. Realizing that the aircraft's rugged construction was perfect for harsh, primitive environments, the RAF shipped thousands of Hurricanes overseas. They became the back-alley brawlers of the Mediterranean, the North African desert, and the dense, humid jungles of Burma, operating from makeshift dirt tracks that would have completely ruined a Spitfire's landing gear. To keep the design relevant against heavier Axis armor, engineers turned the fighter into a dedicated ground attack monster. The legendary Hurricane Mark IID variant, affectionately dubbed the Flying Can Opener, was fitted with two massive, hard-hitting 40mm Vickers Class S cannons under the wings. In the shifting sands of El Alamein, these airborne tank killers wreaked absolute havoc on Rommel's panzer divisions, punching straight through their thin top armor with devastating precision. From the freezing convoy runs of Murmansk to the sweltering jungles of India, the Hurricane didn't care about the climate. You just put fuel in it, loaded the belts, and it went to work. Today, out of 14,500 Hurricanes originally built, only a precious handful remain airworthy. These surviving relics can be seen flying at historic events alongside their old partners, the Spitfires, maintained by organizations like the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight in the UK. For a closer look at original combat veteran airframes, aviation enthusiasts can visit world-class institutions like the Imperial War Museum Duxford, the Royal Air Force Museum Hendon, or the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, where Sydney Camm's steel and fabric triumph still stands in silent tribute. When we look back at the desperate summer of 1940, the Hawker Hurricane leaves us with a profound lesson about the true nature of warfare. It reminds us that victory is rarely won by the most elegant or technologically flawless machine on paper. The glamorous Spitfire took the headlines and won the hearts of the public, but it was Sydney Camm's pragmatic fabric and steel workhorse that won the war of attrition. The Hurricane proved that when a nation's survival is on the line, ease of manufacturing, rapid field repair, and reliable stability matter far more than aesthetic perfection. The Spitfire was the aircraft everyone wanted to fly, but the Hurricane was the aircraft that brought you back alive to fly again tomorrow. Ultimately, the machine was only as good as the human spirit inside it. The young pilots who climbed into those cramped, fabric-covered cockpits, and the dedicated ground crews who patched them together with basic tools in the freezing rain, trusted their lives to a machine that everyone else had written off. They held the line against overwhelming odds, rewriting the course of human history in the process. The Spitfire may have earned the glory, but the Hurricane Hawker earned the victory.